Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous.
How do we even get in to this topic? It's huge.
Okay, well, let's start this way. What inspired you to first even write the book?
Well, let's see. First, I'm going to turn this little note I keep for you on stay visible. Okay, I was researching. Let's just go back to the beginning. When I was 15 or 16 years old, my parents were members of AIPAC, the Jewish lobbying group for Israel. And there were these, AIPAC put out a monthly or weekly newsletter. And the newsletter always told me aspects of things going on in the Middle East that I had never suspected or dreamed of. It was obviously an exotic culture. When I had my mandate of my life's mission, it was to put yourself inside the mind and inside the emotions of as many people and as many cultures as possible in order to be able to see the infinite in the tiniest of things. You know, I got that mission from William Blake, and I got that mission from T.S. Eliot. And in the 1980s, I wrote several chapters on Islam for my first book, The Lucifer Principle. Those I probably researched and wrote around 1988 and 1989. And I just began to discover just little tiny bits of what Islam was all about, as if you're walking on a sheet of dirt, you know, a normal pasture that has a mountain under it. And all you get to see is a little rock here and a little rock there. You don't know it's a mountain. Well, I suspected it was a mountain. And then I began to dig into a guy named that nobody'd ever heard of called Osama bin Laden. And I collected all of his writings, everything he had written, with the intention of turning it into a book. But I had a problem. Nobody was going to be able to understand what Osama was writing. I couldn't, I mean, I could understand that it was deeply scholarly and that there was some underlying framework. But like the mountain under the meadow, all I could see were little tiny hints, and I couldn't see the big framework. So I went to work reading. Well, I tried all kinds of things, and nothing was giving me a clue as to what this code that Osama bin Laden was using was all about. He was using, I couldn't tell the difference between the names of people and the names of places. I couldn't tell who these people were. I couldn't tell what these places were. And I somehow, through assiduous research, stumbled my way into three sources: the Quran, the Hadith, which are the collective sayings of Muhammad, and the Sunnah, the original biographies of Muhammad, including biographies that are used by ordinary Muslim preachers today to preach to their following, standard stories, and then non-standard stories. Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari, who were writing only 100 years to 200 years after Muhammad's death and were themselves Muslims, the products of a Muslim conquest. And I discovered a way of thought that's so simple, so compelling, and so different from ours that it utterly defies belief. And the essential message of that way of thought is what counts here on earth only counts as a test. It's like turning in your SATs when you die. It's a test to see if when you are scrutinized on the day of judgment, you will be cast into hell or you will be allowed into heaven. But it's mere speck, because the life that really counts is an infinite life, a life so vast it makes your life on earth look less than a dot, less than a comma or a period on a page. And that life is the afterlife, the life in either hell or in paradise. And the life in hell, Muhammad used to preach by starting out trying to scare the pants off his fellow Meccans by telling them just how monstrous and horrible hell was, and how hell was just around the corner for all of them if they didn't convert to Islam. It was a terror tactic, a fear tactic from the beginning. So you really did not want to go to hell. You really did want to go to heaven. And how did you get to go to heaven? Well, Muhammad built Islam as a non-stop conquest machine, as a military machine. I know it sounds strange for us that a religion should be a military machine, but Islam is not what we think of as a religion. It is something else. Its own imams say that it is a complete system of life. It's a law code. It's a form of government. It's a form of warfare. And it even tells you what direction to urinate in and how to clean yourself after you've defecated. It goes down to every little detail of your life. But the main point is there is only one express ticket to paradise, and it is killing unbelievers. It is carrying on the jihad against the world that Muhammad himself started in 629 AD, when he commanded 65 military campaigns, and he personally led 27 of them. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said in the Hadith, my greatest pleasure would be to die in the way of Islam, meaning killing infidels, then to be reborn and to kill infidels all over again, and once again to die and to be reborn. That would be my greatest pleasure in life. Killing people. Son of a bitch. We think of a prophet as a prophet of peace. It's a standard phrase in the English vocabulary. Muhammad called himself a prophet of war. So the underlying philosophy of Hamas on October 7th, when it carried out this mass atrocity, killing 1,400 people in the most painful and humiliating way possible. All of that is dictated by Islam to torture them and to make them die in the most painful way possible. And Muhammad had an obsession with cutting off heads. That's why when 40 babies were killed in one kibbutz or moshav, many of them were decapitated. That's why many other people were decapitated, because Muhammad said, lay in wait for them with every form of ambush and attack them and cut off their heads and cut off their fingertips.
Now, how do you think that kind of thought lasted until now?
It was built, it was as if it was one of the most successful systems ever built to last forever. Humans naturally get into us and them. They identify our group by who they hate. They identify who we are by identifying who our enemy is. And that happens, that's built into human nature. There is a drug called oxytocin. And oxytocin makes you loving when you are among members of your own group, and makes you filled with hate when you are facing a rival group. It is built into our nature, the battle of us versus them. The current post-industrialist, post-modernist, post-structuralists say that othering is this, in other words, setting up this division of us versus them, is a characteristic of the capitalist West. No, I'm sorry. Oxytocin existed long before capitalism was ever invented. And you would see us versus them warfare in the paleontological record going way, way back. Plus, our earliest ancestors, bacteria, made war. And they made war in armies. That is, a bacterial colony of billions or trillions was equipped with chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. For what purpose? To wipe out rival bacterial colonies, especially if they were competing for food. So war and us versus them is built into our very foundation 3.85 billion years ago, our great foremothers, bacteria.
So let me ask you a question then. The book, the Muhammad Code, is it a prophecy, a warning, or both?
The Muhammad Code tells you the story, in essence, of a world war that has been going on for 1400 years without us knowing it. And these periodic outbreaks, like the Hamas atrocities of October 7th, or the terrorist bombings in London and Paris 15 or 20 years ago, those are mere tiny manifestations of this larger thing that is built into Islam. And it is, we are in a perpetual jihad. If you are a man, you will not get to paradise unless you get off your ass, get off your sofa, and go out and kill infidels. Period. That's a commandment, an algorithm that is built to expand Islam.
So now with this war going on, they came into Israel and they did what they did. And now, I mean, the only ones that are suffering are the civilians. And don't you think that they have some kind of humanity? I mean, to see that their own.
No, they're against humanity. Islam tells them to kill these people and torture them. The torture started, in other words, the idea that torture was a part of the Quran and a part of God's word started when, Muhammad thought that the people of Mecca, after he made all of these thunderous speeches about how hell was right around the corner, were getting sick of him and wanted to kill him. So he hot-footed it to a town called Yathrib, about 150 miles away. I have the exact distance in the Muhammad Code. And because Muhammad was a place for religious tourism, and the people of all of the tribes for hundreds of miles around would come to Mecca to do a pilgrimage, a Hajj. And Muhammad was preaching to these poor religious tourists coming to worship their gods. And only one group of people was sympathetic to him, the Jews. And Yathrib was a town of Jews. So Muhammad felt that they would take him in. Well, I don't know exactly how it happened, though I can give you many of the details. Muhammad turned against the very people who gave him succor, who gave him sanctuary, the Jews. And Jewish poets started making up poetry that questioned Muhammad. Muhammad felt that he had to come up with a lot of loot to pay off people and make them wealthy to stick around him. And he was looking for a way to get the loot to pay off those who were faithful to him. So the camel caravans, Mecca was a transport city. Muhammad's wife, who he married when she was 40 years old and he was 25, and she proposed to him, was the wealthiest woman in the Hejaz. She, it said, owned 18,000 camels. She was in the transport business. And that meant transporting goods from Yemen, goods that came in from China and India, and some things that were raised in Yemen or in Ethiopia, like coffee, like aromatic spices. And she would transport them to Syria, which was 1,000 miles away, on her camel caravans. So Muhammad wanted to make money so that he could keep his people loyal to him. And he decided to do it by raiding the camel caravans from Mecca as they passed near Medina, which is what he renamed Yathrib. So some of the people, the poets, in Yathrib didn't agree with this approach. And the first thing that happened was the Meccans, after a number of these camel caravan raids that had it, they called Muhammad the highwayman, the guy who steals from travelers. And they decided to exterminate him. And they came with their troops to exterminate him. And somehow he won this battle. And he was particularly eager in this war to kill the people who had mocked him in Mecca, to kill basically the town fathers of Mecca. And then when the war was over, instead of respecting the bodies, well, first of all, bodies were never respected in Islam, because your first task was to take everything these people owned, to take their armor, their weapons, and their clothes, because a suit of clothes in those days cost the equivalent of $5,000 today. And so, in other words, you took everything you could from these men and you left them naked on the field. But Muhammad went beyond just stripping his enemies naked. He threw the bodies into a well. In other words, he made a very public event of showing his contempt for these people and committing what we would consider today probably a war crime, a minor atrocity. That was his first battle. And he divvied up the loot with his men. Chapter 8 of the Quran is all about how to divide up the loot, and especially the sex slaves, the women. So then the Meccans decided to try it again and try to exterminate this guy. He was a pest. He was draining them of their money. And this time, he and his troops took a position with two mountains behind them. The problem with two mountains behind you, Eileen, is that there's a pass in between the two mountains. So Muhammad put archers on that pass, so that if any of the Meccans tried to come up behind his troops through the pass, the archers could pick them off. Well, Muhammad won against the Meccans, and the Meccans fled, or at least that's the way it looked. And Muhammad and his men were picking the clothing and the armor and the weapons, which were worth a fortune, off of the dead Meccan warriors. The archers in the past saw this happening and realized that if they didn't get down to the field fast, there wouldn't be any loot left for them. They would end up impoverished, with all of their friends growing rich at the end of this battle. So they abandoned their position in the past and ran down to the field. That was a mistake. That was apparently exactly what the Meccans were hoping for. They came around behind one of the mountains and came through the pass and wiped out, set Muhammad's army fleeing. And Muhammad stayed on the field, and he was furious. And he managed to kill at least one person. And so Muhammad was up against a dilemma. How do I prevent this from happening in the future? How do I keep my men from fleeing and leaving me alone on the battlefield? And the answer he came up with was, if you die fighting the unbelievers, you go directly to paradise. It was a brilliant solution, because in the grand arithmetic of things, which is worth more, your life on earth or your eternity in paradise? There isn't even any math to show how to compare those two. So that's how we got this idea of you go to paradise and you get 70 virgins. Yes, 72 virgins, sorry, when you get there. Because Muhammad was appealing to a lot of young men to go out and fight. He was appealing to 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And you have not been a 16 or 17-year-old boy, but you're horny as hell at that age. And what Muhammad is promising you is one way or the other, whether you live through the battle or you die in the battle. you get sex. If you die in battle, you get your 72 virgins. If you live, you have a crack at getting some of the women stolen from the group you have just annihilated, some of the women who have been turned into sex slaves. So you saw in the piece I wrote that there was a video circulating on October 7th and 8th of one of the Muslim so-called warriors. And he was in the back of a pickup truck, and he had an Israeli woman, and he put his shawl or something on her head. That is the sign that I have taken possession of this woman as a sex slave. So God knows what has been happening to these poor women that have been taken as hostages. However, we know, I forgot to tell you, in Muhammad's third battle, the Meccans came to wipe him out again. And he had 6 months' notice that they were going to come, because these people had other things to take care of. And war only happened for a season in Arabia. There was a war season. And so the Meccans were going to wait until the war season, and then they were going to eliminate Muhammad and his followers. So since Muhammad had notice, he wondered what to do, and he had a Persian follower. The meaning that this was a follower came from one of the greatest superpowers in the world at the time, the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire and the Roman Empire were it. They were the superpowers of the day. And the Persians said, look, we have a strategy in Persia. You dig a trench, and then if anyone wants to get at you, if any of the enemy wants to get at you, they have to go down the walls of this trench, and you can pick them off like flies, one after another, if they attempt that. So indeed, Muhammad built a trench, and the Mohammedan or the Meccans set up camp on one side of the trench, and Muhammad was in the city, presumably Medina, on the other side of the trench. And the Meccans were trying to wait to starve Muhammad out. And Muhammad was trying to starve the Meccans out. And eventually there came a great wind, minor hurricane or something of the sort, a tornado, some very strong wind that blew down the tents of the Meccans, and was so strong that it even blew their iron cooking pots away, if you can imagine that. And one of the Meccan leaders got up. His camel was huddled on the ground to protect himself from the wind. He went over to his huddled camel, kicked him in the side, made him get to his feet, and said, I'm not taking any more of this, got on his camel, and turned around to go home. Well, seeing that, the other warriors of Mecca got on their camels and turned around and went home. And Muhammad won the Battle of the Trench, battle number 3 of his career. So, but there was no loot, Eileen. Everybody was starving. The Meccans were trying to starve them out and doing a good job. So Muhammad went to the home of one of his wives to wash up. And before he could do that, the angel Gabriel, who was his major contact with Allah, showed up. And Gabriel said, do not take off your armor, do not clean up, get back on your horse, assuming Muhammad had a horse, because a lot of these men were riding mules, and go immediately to a Jewish suburb that you're totally at peace with. Of course, the angel Gabriel didn't mention the fact that they were totally at peace with these people. Or, are you still there? Your picture just went.
Okay.
You're back. Okay. So Muhammad told his men that they should saddle up and to go to this village, this suburb, and that the angel Gabriel had promised him that an army of ghost warriors, spirit warriors, would go with them. And you could see the spirit warriors are there because there were dust devils in the dust in the main lane of the town of Medina. So they all saddled up and they laid siege to this Jewish community that had done nothing to harm them. And they laid siege to them for, I think it was 25 days. And and finally, the Jews had to give up. And Muhammad offered them a deal. He said, okay, kill your wives and children and come out, and we will not kill you. And they said, oh my God, what would we do? What would life be without these dear ones? So Muhammad took the whole bunch, men, women, children, captive. And he wanted to know where the members of this town hid their treasures. So he had the leader of the community, he gave them to his men and said, torture him until he tells you where his treasures are. So they lit a fire on his chest, a dowel and a flint and whatever equipment you use when you're rubbing a dowel very fast in order to make heat. But they made heat on his chest. And it doesn't tell in the Quran or in the Hadith and Sunnah whether he ever revealed where the treasures were, because it's much more interested in something Muhammad was obsessed with. It's interested in the torture, and then it's interested in beheading the man. And the women were all gathered together to be sex slaves. And someone else had taken the wife of this leader of the Jewish community. And she was 18 years old or something like that at the time. And she was very pretty. And she was weeping and wailing and shrieking because they just cut the head off of her husband. And Muhammad said, no, I'll give you some of her cousins. I'm taking this one. And so he married her that very night. Now, can you imagine is having sex with a woman whose husband you've just killed, who is still weeping and wailing over the loss of her husband within hours of the time that you behead him? Is having sex with her likely to be a voluntary act on her part, or what we call rape? This morning there surfaced a tape of a woman who was in touch with her family when she was on a kibbutz. When she saw this butchery taking place, she ran toward, not away from, the butchery, because she was 22 years old, but she was a doctor, and she ran to help. And there are her text messages with her family right up until the time she says, they are on me, I will not survive. What do you think they are on me is likely to mean?
Well,
these men were raping women. Why? Muhammad told them to do that. Muhammad, by the way, set up a system where when you rape a woman, if she has a child, that's a benefit. That is a gift to Muslim society, to the Muslim Ummah. Why? Because any child born with a Muslim father, no matter how he's inseminated that woman, is a Muslim, whether she likes it or not. And every woman inseminated by an Arab is an Arab, whether she likes it or not. So raping women is a great way to expand the size of the Ummah, the size of the community of Islam, the worldwide body of Islam.
Now, do you think that's happening right now as we speak?
Yes.
Okay. And
they did let out a video of one 21-year-old girl, and she's bordering between just pretty and slutty, but one way or the other, it is almost certain that she has been used as a sex slave ever since October 7th and was possibly raped right there in her home before she was dragged away. This is dictated by Muhammad. This is what Muhammad did.
Okay, so should we be scared?
Yes, we should not only be scared, we should be resolute. we should understand that this is a 7th century view, and it's what we regard justly as barbaric, hideous, and monstrous. Because ultimately it says, imagine that you and I were WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They would be coming for us too. Because everybody who hasn't converted to Islam is an unbeliever. And who does Islam kill the most? Year after year after year, by the tens of thousands. Fellow Muslims. So you're not even safe if you convert to Islam.
So, do you think there's a solution?
Yeah, wipe the fucking bastards out. Wipe out this way of thought. There are 2 versions of Islam. One is the version from Mecca, which was tolerant and peaceful. The other is the version that Muhammad developed in Medina when he was killing Jews who criticized what he was doing. There was one Jewish poet who, after the Battle of Badr, remember where the leading men of the Meccan community were thrown into a well, their bodies were thrown into a well, a serious flagrant display of disrespect. One poet from Medina, a Jewish poet, went to Mecca, lamenting the death of the greatest citizens of Mecca, the men who had been bounteous and given things away in time of scarcity, the most noble of men, Muhammad. This guy was, I think he was the one who was 110 years old. And Muhammad had his people, once the poet returned to Medina, he had his people go in the middle of the night and ram a sword straight through his body all the way to the ground. 110-year-old man. For what? For what we would call dissent. Then another Jewish poet criticized the men of Medina for taking the loot from these outlaw expeditions of Muhammad's to raid camel caravans. And guess what Muhammad had done to her? She had 5 children. She had one baby who was suckling at the moment. He had one of his men go to her in the middle of the night and do the same thing that had been done to Ka'b the poet. Ram something straight through her until it reached the ground, thus killing her. So what does that tell you about the treatment of dissent under a Muslim government? Because you are required in Islam, if you are going to be a good Muslim, you have to study every footstep taken by the Prophet, and you have to imitate it. So what does that mean about what you should do to dissenters? With the second woman, the guy who killed her wasn't sure he had understood Muhammad's intention correctly, and he was scared to death of the fires of hell. So he came to Muhammad the next morning and said, Muhammad, I've done something that could be a sin. And Muhammad said, no, you have not done a sin. You should know, even without a command, when I want a person who is not obeying Allah killed. You should know it without even a command. And your default mode should be kill that person. You did good. The universe will not care any more about her than it cares about the banging of the horns of 2 young sheep. What does this tell you about? Well, then there's another phrase you need to know. I first heard it from a Lebanese member of Hezbollah shortly after Hezbollah had been founded, in a documentary on Britain's ITV. And since then, I've heard it in Central Asia and all over the place. And when I went to look it up, it is all over the place, but not in this concise, nice form. The phrase is, we love death more than you love life. In other words, when we come to attack your kibbutz, we're not afraid of death. We're looking forward to it. We get 72 virgins. And if we don't get 72 virgins and stay alive, we get to rape your wife and daughters. So one way or the other, we win. But you care about lives. That is your impediment. That is how we will always defeat you, with your caring about lives. Because life is ephemeral and disappears. And the real reality is paradise or hell.
And you know what, Howard? I think I'm going to stop there because that's a beautiful ending. I mean, not a beautiful ending, but a beautiful ending.
Well, so did we? Thought we only got 2 pickups for the article that you wrote. One was press party, so that doesn't really count as a pickup. But
No, it's not that. It's not that. When I write an article, I only it only goes to 1 or 2 places because I mean we can put it. I can send it everywhere, but I don't usually do that.
right, I would send it everywhere because these messages are extremely important in understanding what we are fighting and what we are fighting for.
Well, we can do that. It's actually Jimmy that would be doing that, and I will tell him to.
Okay, good,
But
good. Well, thank you for interviewing me. This is an urgent issue, and it took years.
well, you know
And
what?
years to find all out.
This might be continued. So depending on whatever happens.
Okay, terrific.
But thank you, Howard, for your time.
Well,
And
may we all be well. May all of the Western powers be well. May Israel be well, and may Hamas be damned.
I agree.
Okay, have a great night.
You too, Howard. Bye.
Bye. It's great to see you.
You too. You too, Howard. We'll talk again soon.
Okay.
All right.